Good morning, I'm Gerg Cahiles sitting in for Mikey Oreta and you're watching Business 360, where we break down the numbers, connect the dots, and give you the developments and the insights you need to navigate, adapt, and lead. Let's dive right in. President Bongbong Marcos secures investment pledges from top Indian firms in 4 key sectors. The Transportation Department says the rehabilitation of EDSA Busway will start this year. And the camp of Vice President Sara Duterte says their work on their impeachment case is not yet over. Let's take a look at how global financial markets performed overnight. Wall Street ended mixed on Thursday while oil prices declined for a 6th straight session. This came after the Kremlin announced that Russian President Vladimir Putin will meet U.S. President Donald Trump in hopes of reaching a breakthrough to end the war in Ukraine.
The other thing hitting markets today is the fact that tariffs kick in, and while we still have quite a bit of negotiating to do country by country, they are enacted. And so that is going to weigh on different aspects of the market, the supply chain, pricing. And so I think right now it's a lot of that digestion on, how long are negotiations going to take for different countries? What do they look like in the end?
The Dow Jones fell 0.5%, while the S&P declined 500, almost 0.1%, or the S&P 500 declined almost 0.1%, but the Nasdaq gained 0.3%. In Europe, markets are mixed. London's FTSE dropped nearly 0.7%, while Germany's DAX added more than 1%, and France's CAC 40 gained almost 1%. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has secured investment pledges from top Indian business leaders in 4 key sectors. In meetings in Bengaluru, Marcos gained commitments to boost the Philippines' digital infrastructure and healthcare. Other sectors include the information technology and business process management, as well as renewable energy. Several Indian firms are eyeing expanded operations in the Philippines. The Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas is moving to regulate e-wallets used for online gambling. New rules will require biometric ID checks, spending limits, and time-based controls to curb addiction and financial harm. The BSP says the measures aim to promote safer, more responsible use of digital financial services. This comes amid growing calls from lawmakers, religious leaders, and even President Marcos to address the social impact of online gambling. While some want a total ban, others warn that could cost jobs and hurt consumer protection. The Philippine economy is growing but not fast enough for comfort. With global threats looming and targets tightening, can the country still hit its mark by year-end? Sujin Kim reports.
The Philippine economy grew by 5.5% in the second quarter, a slight improvement from 5.4% in Q1. This, however, is a sharp slowdown from the 6.5% growth recorded in the same period last year.
With this performance, we maintain our place among the fastest growing economies in emerging Asia, behind Vietnam's 8.0% growth, but ahead of China's 5.2% and Indonesia's 5.1%. While our growth is lower than India's projected 6.5% expansion, we're expected to outpace Malaysia's 4.3% and Thailand's 2.4%.
With the Development Budget Coordination Committee, or DBCC, revising its full-year growth target to 5.5 to 6.5%, DepDev Secretary Arsenio Balisacan said the lower end is just around the corner.
All we need to do to achieve is, for the rest of the year, is 5.6% to achieve the lower limit of the range of 5.5. So that's already just around the corner. But I think that we'll do better in the second half. Confident that the inflation has gone down quite substantially, and the past reduction in the policy rates.
However, to hit the upper end of the target of 6.5%, the economy must grow by 7.5%.
7.5 is high, but it's not impossible. I think that if we see continuing, for example, improvement in the confidence of our consumers, no? And our domestic investors and the economy, we should see a greater growth, a higher growth in both consumption and investment, no? And in the services.
The Q2 data comes amid heightened concerns following U.S. President Donald Trump's announcement of a proposed 100% tariff on semiconductor exports. Philippine Semiconductor and Electronics Industries President Dan Lachica warned this move could be devastating since semiconductors account for 70% of the country's exports. But the government maintains
if they raise that to 100% and that will include us, then of course that we will be affected. But insofar as it's the effects on the economy, I don't expect that to be adverse.
He encouraged the industry to diversify markets and products, including exploring opportunities in countries like India, which President Marcos recently visited to assess its potential as an alternative export destination. Sujin Kim, Bilyonaryo News Channel.
External and domestic challenges may keep Philippine growth below 6% in the next few years. The IDEA Senior Research Fellow John Paulo Rivera sees 2025 GDP at 5.3 to 5.7%, citing higher U.S. tariffs, weaker exports, and rising rice import costs. He warns that a construction slowdown and job losses could further drag services and related industries, keeping 2026 growth at 5.5 to 6%. Let's get more insights on the various challenges faced by the Philippine economy. John Paulo Rivera, Senior Research Fellow of the Philippine Institute for Development Studies, joins us via Zoom. JP, good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me.
Well, firstly, the country's gross domestic product grew by 5.5% in the second quarter. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, when I heard that it's at 5.5%, it is actually a decent print. It is slightly quicker than the Q1, and it is in line with government expectations. And this actually shows the resilience of the Philippine economy amidst the weak global trade and very tight policy.
But what do you think drove the economy's growth during the second quarter?
Well, the main growth drivers would remain to be household consumption. It has remained sturdy. And this is actually because of inflation really slowing down significantly. Government consumption also reaccelerated with many government agencies' budget utilization rate on target. And actually, services also led the supply side with faster quarter-on-quarter gains.
But do you expect this upward trend to continue in the coming quarters?
Well, optimistically speaking, this uptrend will continue in the near term, but moderately. I'm very cautious about this one because in this inflation coupled with job support consumption, public spending pipelines can actually help that. But there will always remain to be headwinds, such as soft private capital expenditures, the lag in construction, as what I have mentioned previously, no? And again, the persistence of external uncertainties, the policy uncertainties in the United States affecting our domestic economy.
Now, growth was seen across the services, agriculture, and industry sectors. What do you think contributed to this?
Well, that's actually a great development because all these sectors grew. For example, in services, it has actually been driven by tourism adjacent activities, including transport, trade, business services. They benefited from low inflation and the remaining tailwinds. For agriculture, we have seen slight recovery, and this has actually been assisted by improved weather inputs from quarter two and lower fuel and fertilizer costs. But what's interesting is on industry, because manufacturing has actually stabilized. Construction mixed performance, but it is actually supported by public works and government spending.
A lot of things right there. But earlier, we heard DepDev Secretary Arsenio Balisacan. He said that Trump's 100% tariff on semiconductors will not have major effect. Do you agree?
Well, I would broadly agree, because it is still manageable in the near term. The announced plan actually included, if I'm not mistaken, carve-outs or exemptions tied to U.S. manufacturing commitments like Apple and others. No? So big foundries like US Fabs, no? TSMC, Samsung, and so on. It appeared to be shielded, and then PH exports are mostly back-end anyway. Assembly tests in global chains. No? We're participating at the back end. However, as what I can see, that this 100% tariff would actually threaten to disrupt our semiconductor and electronics value chain industry in the medium term to long term, especially if the Philippines, no, we would lack production commitments similar to those commitments granted to major firms like Apple. But at the onset, no, the most immediate impact could be a sharp drop in demand for our chip-enabled exports. But this can happen from the medium term to the long term. But so far, I would broadly agree that it is still manageable.
Well, that's a good analysis in that aspect. But earlier you said that you're expecting moderate growth in the coming quarters. So what is your GDP outlook for the third quarter? Gaano ba ka-moderate itong moderate and the rest of the year probably? And what are the factors likely to influence it?
Well, because the third quarter doesn't anymore include the impact of election spending on the economy, I would still see a positive growth, no? a growth, and this could be moderately growing around 5.6 to 5.8% for quarter three, barring any weather or climate change disturbances to our domestic production. And given that figure, for the full year, I would see that the full year GDP would hover around 5.7 to 6% optimistically, with the midpoint around 5.9%. And the upside would be due to slowing inflation, budget catch up, the performance of domestic tourism activities, but it will always be threatened by downsides such as weak private construction due to the relatively high interest rates until now, external trade softness, and of course, climate change impacts.
Well, speaking of inflation, it eased to 0.9%. So do you think this will be sustained?
Okay, yes, the inflation can be sustained. No? A sub 1% inflation is probably the trough. No? And for the succeeding months and quarters, I am now expecting a gentle reacceleration into the second half as base effects would now fade. But still, regardless of that, inflation would remain below target, midpoint this year. But this is conditioned on food and energy prices remaining to be manageable and benign.
But do you think the Philippines is, could be experiencing deflation? Is it a possibility this year?
Well, for deflation, I do not see it. I do not see it happening because while the year-on-year inflation for July actually dipped to 0.9%, we can see that on the month-on-month basis, it is slightly positive, and policy settings are not contractionary until now. Weather and global oil also cap the downside, so it's very unlikely.
Well, let's talk about jobs now. The PSA cited more job opportunities as the reason for lower unemployment rate. Do you agree?
The quality of jobs being created, it is improving. I would have to support it's improving, but it remains to be uneven because more wage or salaried posts, particularly in services and public projects, part-time hours or part-time workers, low-hour roles, and informal workers remain to be elevated in certain industries like retail, hospitality, even agriculture.
Oo. And well, you're talking about the quality of jobs. Ano yung assessment mo dito?
Well, again, quality would have to go side by side with the reduction in unemployment. So we need to focus on genuine job creation rather than simply just exits from the labor force. Quality remains to be increasing, but it is still mixed. But the good thing about this one is that headline gains, as far as employment is concerned, they are real.
Your unemployment forecast for July, please, JP.
For July, no? For July 2025, unemployment rate would continue to be stable, around 3.6 to 3.9%, putting the national average for 2025 around 3.7% to 4%. And the drivers of the future, no, our forecast for unemployment would be, the reduction in unemployment would be tourism peak season. It will provide employment again to many of our kababayans. Public works are now hiring, the easing inflation, and unemployment might be driven by risks from weather events and, of course, the construction slowdown, particularly in residential buildings.
Earlier, we talked about inflation. So I'm just wondering, do you think the BSP has room to cut interest rates this month? And if so, by how many basis points?
Okay. So,
Pwede pa ba?
looking at the behavior of BSP recently and with the trend in inflation for the Philippines, yes, there's always a room for this year, no, for the BSP to cut rates, but I would be very cautious about it to just at 25 basis points.
Why?
Given that we have deeply positive real rates, inflation is far below target. However, we need to monitor its impact on foreign exchange because a very aggressive move for the BSP would now risk the Philippine peso to a volatile behavior. So I'm seeing right now, given the macro indicators, that a hold then signal path might be the best way to look at the direction of rate cuts for now.
And lastly, what is your inflation forecast for August and the remainder of the year?
Okay, so since base effects would now be curtailed, for August, I'm actually seeing an above 1% to 1.5% year-on-year inflation for August, which will put the full year 2025 average to 1.8 to 2%, still below the target band of the government. But this is always a risk by climate change impacts as well as changes in oil prices, given the geopolitical situation in the Middle East and in other territories where oil plays an important role.
Well, thank you very much, JP Rivera, for joining us this morning.
Okay, thank you.
Now we're taking a quick break. Please stay with us as we dive deep into the numbers and narratives that matter most to your bottom line. Trading at the Philippine Stock Exchange opened earlier. Let's look at the initial figures. The PSEI is flat with a slight uptick, trading at 63.65. Majority of the sub-indices are in the green. Advancers currently outpacing decliners 81 to 55. So far, value turnover has reached more than 1 billion pesos. Meanwhile, in currency markets, the peso opened at 56.92 to the dollar, appreciating from previous close of 56.97. Baguio City Mayor Benjamin Magalong is willing to become a resource person if the House of Representatives will probe alleged corruption in infrastructure projects. Magalong said he is just waiting for a House summons. The mayor made the statement after House Committee on Accounts Chair Terry Redon said Magalong should show his evidence linking lawmakers and other government officials to corrupted infra projects. But the mayor asserts lawmakers should treat him as a resource person and not as an accused. President Bongbong Marcos had said no one will be spared in the administration's crackdown in those responsible for failed flood control projects. Ultra-Bilyonaryo Ramon Ang of Sumigal Corporation offers to solve Metro Manila's flooding problem after results of their investigation show that the Tulyahan River is clogged. He says the river is the main drainage of Quezon City, Valenzuela, Navotas, Malabon, and Obando in Bulacan. RSA says housing may also be offered for those who might be affected. He also plans to build a waste-to-energy facility where metro mayors can bring their trash.
Ang daming solution, ang daming pera pinag-uusapan. Kami nang gagawa. Sa Miguel na magkiklearing. Pero without you guys authorizing us, hindi namin magagawa yun. Kailangan pa ba ng batas yun? Hindi na. Yung mga nagtayo ng bahay sa gitna, tanggalin na yun. Kaya dami nyo pang genius na nakita ko sa television.
President Bongbong Marcos wants to include Catholic Church officials in a group that will be created to formulate the government's policy on online gambling. In his podcast, Marcos was asked why he did not mention online gambling in his fourth State of the Nation address. The president gave an update on how his administration is addressing the issue.
Because we still have to form the policy on what we are going to do about online gambling. And to this end, I have already started to organize to convene a conference of those who are all the stakeholders. We are talking about marami tayong naririnig from the CBCP. So, sama natin sila, mga pare, mga obispo. The parents, of course, are stakeholders here kasi victimized demographic ang mga kabataan. Tapos, we have to talk to the people who will, kung magre-regulate tayo, who will be doing the regulation. The first effect of banning it fully is to put it underground. And then we have no control. Yan talagang wala na tayong regulation.
Several lawmakers have pushed for a ban on the industry, citing rising cases of gambling addiction. Manuel Villar has entered the Bloomberg Billionaires Index, ranked 99th globally with a net worth of $23.1 billion, the only Filipino in the top 100. He built his fortune through real estate empires like Vesta Land, Villar Land Holdings, and retail chains such as All Home and All Day. Enrique Razon Jr. also made the Bloomberg list at 239th with $12.3 billion tied to his stakes in port operator ICTSI, Soler Casino, and Manila Water. On Forbes' list, however, Razon is currently the second richest Filipino, while Villar places third, highlighting a notable difference between the two rankings. The discrepancy boils down to methodological differences in how each index measures and tracks wealth. Megaworld Corporation, through Megaworld Hotels and Resorts, is set to open 7 new hotels by 2030 as part of its goal to grow its portfolio to 9,000 rooms. The list includes the 554-room Chancellor Hotel in Boracay, New Coast, the 404-room Belmont Hotel Iloilo, and the 300-room The Kingsford in Bacolod. Also planned are the Savoy Hotel Palawan, Paragua Sands in San Vicente, Savoy Capital Town in Pampanga, and Arcovia Hotel in Pasig City. Alliance Global President and CEO Kevin Tan says the expansion is aimed at strengthening the group's hospitality portfolio and attracting more tourists, conventions, and events. The Philippines will not cede a single inch of its territory. That's President Ferdinand Marcos Jr.'s assurance after being blasted with criticism for not explicitly mentioning the West Philippine Sea in his recent State of the Nation address. In an interview with Indian news outlet First Post, Marcos said the country will never give up the exercise of its sovereign rights. He stressed that the Philippines can defend its territory, modernize its military, and remain a friend to all and an enemy to none. In his SONA, Marcos reiterated his friend to all, enemy to none policy. The government is set to begin rehabilitation work on the EDSA Busway this year despite a tight budget. Phase 1 will cover 4 existing stations, including Monumento and Guadalupe, with a budget of 212 million pesos. Phase 2, which includes new stations in PITX and Cubao, will follow with a similar cost and start construction by October. Transportation Secretary Vince Dizon says each phase is expected to be completed in about a year, with all improvements finished by mid to late 2026. Dizon says the push comes from the President's directive to speed up projects that improve daily commutes. We're taking a short break. Business 360 will be right back. Senator Amy Marcos took a swipe at an unnamed congressman who she says is allegedly using the impeachment as a political weapon. She made a dig right after voting to archive the impeachment case against Vice President Sara Duterte, a move backed by 19 senators following a Supreme Court ruling that declared it unconstitutional.
Bakit naman ngayon ay naging tagabantay na lamang sila ng humihiyaw na dambuhalang sanggol? Ginawa ng bonjing na armas ang impeachment. Ano kaya kung yung speaker nyo na lang ang paltan nyo? Kaya nyo yan?
House leaders fired back, calling Marcos's statements a cheap political trick. Progressive groups also protested inside the Senate during the vote, claiming intimidation after they were escorted out and blocked from leaving. The Senate's move to archive the impeachment case against Vice President Sara Duterte is now facing sharp criticisms. Palace Press Officer Claire Castro accused the senators of hiding behind the Supreme Court's ruling to avoid blame instead of waiting for a final decision.
Tingin ko lang, itong mga senador na to, feeling ko lang to ha, gusto talaga nilang i-dismiss, pero nagtatago ngayon sila sa decision ng Supreme Court. Nakatakas ang Senado sa judgment ng mga tao na sila ang pumatay sa impeachment kasi ang tinuturo nila Supreme Court.
Representative Dima slammed the Senate's action as premature and questioned why it was handled in plenary and not as an impeachment court.
Kasi nga, meron pang motion for reconsideration. Pina-comment pa nga ng Korte Suprema yung petitioners, sila Vice President Sara Duterte and si Attorney Torion. Kung talagang final na yan, hindi na sana pinansin yung mga MR.
Both Castro and De Lima warned that the move undermines accountability amid unanswered questions over the Vice President's confidential funds. ML Party List Representative Laya de Lima says the Supreme Court overstepped its bounds in interfering with the impeachment trial of Vice President Sara Duterte. In an interview on BNC's Agenda, she says that while the Supreme Court should step in during clear violations of the Constitution, the House of Representatives did no such wrong in the impeachment case.
As a lawyer, I'm very well aware of the fact that Supreme Court natin is the final arbiter of controversies. Now, kaya lang, yung pakikialam mismo na nasobrahan ng pakikialam ng Supreme Court ay questionable na yun eh. Hindi ko sinasabi na never na makialam ang Supreme Court. Yes, pwede makialam ang Supreme Court, but only in clear cases of violation of the Constitution na talagang malinaw yung pagba-violate ng Constitution and there is a manifest grave abuse of discretion. I humbly submit na wala namang ganun dito sa kaso na to. The House, when it initiated, based on the existing provision of the Constitution and the existing rules of the House on impeachment, ay walang maling ginawa.
The camp of Vice President Sara Duterte says their work is not yet over, since the Supreme Court has yet to decide on the motion for reconsideration filed by the House of Representatives. On Wednesday, 19 out of 24 senators voted to archive the articles of impeachment against Vice President Sara Duterte. This after the Supreme Court ruled that the impeachment complaint was unconstitutional as it violated the one-year rule on filing such cases. But if the High Court reverses its decision, senators may vote to revive the case. Duterte spokesman Michael Poe said the Vice President is ready to face allegations of misuse of confidential funds. We're taking a breather. Business 360. We'll be right back. Anti-ICE organizations held a rally in response to an immigration raid earlier this week at the Home Depot parking lot in Los Angeles. The group called for a 24-hour financial boycott to big box retailers like Home Depot, where several ICE raids have taken place across LA. Protesters say the recent raids violated a court-approved temporary restraining order. Local media reports U.S. Border Patrol agents did conduct an immigration raid at the Home Depot in LA Westlake area August 6th. Israeli police clashed with demonstrators in Tel Aviv on Thursday. They are demanding the release of hostages still being held by Hamas in Gaza. They also want an end to the war in the enclave. Police used water cannon to disperse the crowd. The protest is part of ongoing public pressure on the Israeli government to secure the return of hostages and seek a resolution to the conflict. Israeli officials say 50 hostages remain in Gaza. They believe 20 are still alive. Switzerland continue negotiations with the U.S. after President Donald Trump imposed a 39% tariff on Swiss goods. The tariff, among the highest under Trump's trade reset, took effect after last-minute negotiations failed. It targets luxury watches, cheese, and chocolate, key Swiss exports to the U.S., while sparing pharmaceuticals for now. Swiss President Karin Keller-Sutter says the Federal Council will continue fighting for a better deal.
The Federal Council will, of course, continue to strive to improve the customs situation. It will fight for this. It will commit itself to this cause. It will continue to negotiate intensively with the aim of achieving an improvement within a reasonable period of time. However, this ultimately lies in the hands of the American president. It is therefore right that Switzerland should also take internal measures to prepare for difficult times.
Texas Senate Republicans and Democrats clashed over a redistricting map backed by U.S. President Donald Trump. It's designed to flip 5 Democrat-held House seats in next year's midterms. GOP Senator Phil King says the plan aims to elect more Republicans. He insists it is permissible under the law. But Democrat Boris Miles counters that Texas shouldn't redraw maps just because Trump says so. More than 50 Democratic lawmakers left the state to block a quorum, prompting the Republican House Speaker to issue civil warrants to bring them back from Democratic-led states.
My first objective in adopting the House map and presenting this map today, my first objective is to create a plan that elects more Republicans to the U.S. Congress. In contrast to the complications involved with race-based redistricting, political performance, in this case, my objective of electing more Republicans to the U.S. Congress, is a permissible basis for drawing electoral districts.
And I've been in this building for 20 years now. And we've always stood tall as Texans. We've never compared ourselves to any other state in this country. We've never risen because the federal government told us to rise. This is Texas. Okay, we're Texans. I really don't give a what goes on in the other community, in the other state. I just care about Texas. And the last time I checked, you represented community in Texas, like I have.
And that's it for Business 360. I'm Gerg Cahiles. Thank you for joining us. Keep it here on BNC, the Bilyonaryo News Channel.